I'm Alara.
And Alex.
And this is going to be our first video on our Tarot Tuesday series. So we're going to try this out, see how this goes, and we may end up switching up the camera for some of our future videos if this doesn't work out very well. But this is just going to be a very quick, brief introduction to tarot for those of you that have never really picked up a tarot deck before. So real quick, tarot is something that has really not been around all that long. It's only been around for a few hundred years. And really, I'm not going to go very deep into the history of tarot. It's something that mostly started about 400 years ago as a playing card game, kind of like hearts or spades. And then over time, it developed into a divinatory system. But it actually really wasn't until the very early 1900s that tarot started to become what we would consider to be a modern tarot deck, which actually happened with the creation of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is actually the deck that I have in my hands right now. This is my own personal deck. This is the back of the cards, and this is actually a traditional Rider-Waite deck, so it actually goes off of the original design. The only thing different is that I have the Radiant deck, so some of the colors are a little bit brighter and more vivid and things like that. And I actually have these out of order for just a few of the things that I'm going to be covering today. So when you're looking at a traditional tarot deck, a modern tarot deck has 78 cards in it. Now, you pointed out that someone had mentioned to you that there have been other decks that had less cards in it. And that's actually something that's really important to note for those of you that are looking to go out and buy your first tarot deck. Make sure that what you start out with is a traditional tarot deck. Most of the time, those are going to have 78 cards, which some tarot decks that I've seen have been less cards because I've seen some decks that omit the court cards because those can be really difficult to read. Some people find them to be the most difficult to read, and I'll be honest, it was the hardest thing for me to learn when I was first teaching myself tarot. And then also I've seen some decks that don't have the majors included. They only have the minor suits, kind of like a deck of playing cards where it only has 54 playing cards. And I've seen the ones that are the opposite, where they don't have the minor cards, they just have the 22 majors. And those all serve a different purpose, but for really learning the tarot, I recommend starting out with just a traditional 78 card deck. And I will always preach, you know, the wonders of the Rider-Waite-Smith, just because this was my original that I really started teaching myself with as far as tarot decks go. Because it's actually funny, when I first started out, I didn't have access to tarot cards, so I taught myself using I bought 2 packs of just playing cards that I got at the dollar store, and I wrote all over them and I turned them into a tarot deck, and that's how I taught myself. But I wouldn't always recommend that for very beginners because it didn't have the imagery, which helps you learn some of the, you know, the key themes. But I was just working with what I have, and it is possible if that's something that you really want to do. But I'll always recommend starting out with just a Rider-Waite-Smith deck if you're really wanting to learn the tarot in depth. So let's kind of get into it. When you're looking at a tarot deck, there are 5 different components, 5 different categories to a traditional modern tarot deck. And that's going to be the biggest one is going to be the majors, which is 22 cards. The first one being the full. And you'll notice that the full does not start at 1, it starts at 0, and it actually does that on purpose. So with the majors, it's technically 1 through 21 in 0 through 21 in numbering, with 0 being the first card. And that's actually really interesting to look at with the 22 majors because you know, most people would think, oh, it starts with 1, which is the magician, and then it goes all the way to 21, the world. But for those of you that are interested in numerology, traditionally the Fool, since it's 0, it comes at the beginning of the majors. But for those of you that are interested in numerology, the Fool can also be considered the completion of the majors. So the Fool is very interesting and is going to be the first card that we look at when I start looking at the individual cards themselves, because it's such a key foundational card for tarot as a whole, because its entire meaning, plus many other meanings, is beginnings. It's a fresh start, but it's also the beginning and completion. It's the infinite, which many people with numerology consider the number 0 to be infinity. So that's really important. That's one of the key things, is the majors, and then after that, everything else is the four minor suits. The 4 minor suits actually, okay. The 4 minor suits are important because they make up the 4 elements, like fire, air, earth, water. And we have a little photo of them that we're going to insert on the video here, but just for the purposes, I'm going to pick one to just kind of show you up close. So we'll do the Ace of Pentacles. So the Ace of Pentacles is actually the number 1. So each time you see an ace, it is the number 1 in the suit. It's also considered to be the living embodiment of that particular element. So the Pentacles is the ace of that particular suit, but it's also the ace of earth. Pentacles rules earth. It rules finances, money, prosperity, physical health, and things like that. And then the Ace of Cups. The Ace of Cups, I'm pretty sure you can tell by looking at it, rules the element of water. It is the living embodiment of water, but it also, the entire suit covers emotions and feelings, things like that. Ace of Swords. So the Ace of Swords rules air, and it's also, a lot of times, it is the suit talking about thoughts, intellectual, like the mind. Air is associated with the mind and things like that, which is why when I first got to know this card, I was kind of surprised. Sorry, technical difficulties. But like I was saying, when I first got to know this card, I was kind of surprised that it didn't have like any yellow in it, since it was the ace of like air. The element itself was air. But I don't know. I've always been rather attached to the Ace of Swords. And then the last ace is the Ace of Wands. So the Ace of Wands is the element of, it's a suit of fire, and it's also the suit of passion and creativity and actions. So whenever you're looking at each of the suits, each suit contains 14 cards. So it has the 10 pip cards, and then the page, knight, queen, and king. Just kind of like in a regular suit of playing cards, or a regular deck of playing cards. So if you ever take out the majors, you're left with 54 cards that are very reminiscent of playing cards. The only difference is with the minors, they come with actual imagery instead of the normal like numbered pips, which makes it a lot easier to learn. So the 1 through 10 within the suits, setting the court cards aside, the 1 through 10 of the suits a lot of times is going to follow the sequence of that element. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about this whenever we get a little bit further on in the show, because at the very end, after I go through all of each individual cards, I'm going to lay out each of the suit and go through them one suit at a time, so I can show you something that I learned that was very beneficial to me when I was picking up tarot. about the progression of the element through the suits. But just for the purpose of this show, or for this particular video, when you're looking at a suit, and I've already showed you the aces, so for the ace all the way through the tens, most of the cards in a traditional Rider-Waite are actually going to show you the number of objects. Like this one's the 9 of cups. If you count, it actually has 9 cups in the card and things like that. But it also has the other imagery that tells you a story about what's going on. And I find that a lot of the cards in the minors go very hand in hand with the idea of numerology. So that's something that will help us learn the tarot as I go through some of these videos with you when I start talking more in depth about this. Because this particular video is just a dissection of the tarot deck. It's not meant to be anything in depth. It's just a brief introduction for those of you that have never really picked up one before. And then each of my videos will go into different elements of tarot, and we'll end up breaking it down and then building it up. And then once we're done actually looking at each of the cards of tarot, we're going to look at some major groups. And then we'll start talking about bigger concepts and ideas within tarot and how that can help you build your relationship to the cards and start building up how you interpret the cards, so that you start building your own relationship with your deck and start really coming into whatever makes you special, what makes you individual as a tarot reader. But last but not least is within the minor suits is the court cards. Each suit has a set of court cards, which, like I said, we're going to leave a few photos of each of them. So first is the pages. Pages are considered, I consider them to be the learners of the tarot. And then right after that comes the knights. I consider them to be the action-oriented court members. And then comes the queens. Most people consider them the nurturers. And then the kings, which are normally considered to be like the authority figure, kind of like the overall head of the tarot. So within each of the suits, there's always going to be a king, queen, knight, and page. However, it is really important to note that in other tarot decks, they may be named something different other than the typical, Queen of Wands, King of Pentacles, things like that. I have seen it where they each have their own individual title. I've also seen it to where they are named, like the suit itself is named something different. Like I've seen it where the pentacles have been named coins or discs or rocks. I've seen I've seen the cups represented as shells, or sometimes they will just refer to an entire suit as whatever that element is. So it would be like the Two of Water, or the Queen of Fire, or something like that. So that's just something really, really particular to note for those of you that haven't looked at a whole bunch of different tarot cards. Now, to conclude this real quick video, I did want to kind of also add in some other notes with tarot, is the fact that there are a bunch of different decks out there. There are a bunch of different card decks within the witchy and metaphysical community. So it's very easy sometimes if you've never really been introduced to tarot prior to this, to accidentally get a deck thinking it's a tarot deck, but it's really not. So things like angel decks or anything labeled an oracle deck, those are specifically not tarot cards. They are a different kind of, not necessarily a divination system, but a means of getting greater intuition and insight on certain topics, but they do not follow the structure of a tarot deck. Like a tarot deck almost always is going to follow some of the same structure of, it's going to have the 5 components. So it's going to have the majors, and then it's going to have the 4 suits. In some way. It may be called something different, but it will have those 5 elements. Oracle decks are not going to follow that. They're going to have differing amounts of cards. They're not going to follow any such structure. Angel cards will be the same way. It's not going to have the same structure as tarot. And then also there are decks called, I always have a hard time pronouncing this because for whatever reason my dyslexic brain kicks in and I try to like swap around the letters. So it's either, it's the Limerand decks. Those specifically are divinatory cards. They are not tarot. They typically come with, I think, 36 cards, and they are much more simplistic in their structure. It's almost always the same cards, but they are much more just images that have set meanings to them rather than an actual system that has those 5 components. A Limerand deck does not have those 5 components. It doesn't have the same structure of the majors and the minors. So that would not be useful for this particular thing. It is really useful and interesting for other things, but just not for this. And then there are Marseille decks. Marseille decks do technically fall under tarot. However, you have to be careful with some Marseille decks because it is a reflection of some of the older tarot cards before I consider it a pre-modern tarot deck. So it may have 78 cards sometimes, but they will not be the traditional cards because before the modern tarot deck, the majors were slightly mixed up in the way that they were, in that there was, I want to say, a Hierophant and a Pope card, but it was missing 1 or 2 other cards that are in a normal deck. So the Marseille deck is also, I've seen it used traditionally more for a divinatory system, although I have seen people use it more as a traditional tarot deck. It's just important to note that a Marseille deck is noticeably different from a traditional tarot deck because some of the cards are different. And a lot of times I've seen the Marseille deck having, for the minors, they have the pips sometimes similar to playing card decks rather than the images of a tarot deck. So for those of you that are actually looking to just get a tarot deck, just make sure that it's just a regular tarot deck, that it's not a Marseille deck, it's not an Oracle or an Angel deck or a Limerand, or I already said it, I can't pronounce it because dyslexic brain. But it's not any of those things. Just make sure it's a regular tarot deck, and it comes with 78 cards, and it has the 22 majors and the 54 minors. And that's pretty much it. This is just, like I said, I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction as to the dissection of a tarot deck and kind of the different elements that you can find within that. Hopefully my next video, I think I'm going to go into the Fool's Journey, which is a closer look at the 22 majors in a way that people have come up with to try to make it easier to learn and understand the majors. There are many different theories and ways of looking at it, many different ideas for the Fool's Journey, but I'm going to cover just some of what those are, the differences between them, and just kind of take you through that. And that's how we'll get a brief overview of the majors before we start looking at individual cards. So hopefully that's what I'll be coming out with for my next Tarot Tuesday. But until then, I hope that you enjoyed this. Thanks for sitting and learning along with us, Alex. And that's pretty much it.